A corporate parking garage. Late at night. The hum of distant traffic, the echo of maintenance equipment. And then everything changes in an instant. A woman stands face to face with 7 armed men, sent to destroy her. But here's the twist nobody saw coming. This isn't just any woman. This is someone who's survived things most of us can't even imagine. And what happens next? It's going to completely change how you think about strength, courage, and what it really means to stand up for yourself. Welcome back, friends. Before we dive in, I need to ask you something. If you're enjoying what you're hearing, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button right now. Like this video. Drop a comment telling me where you're tuning in from. Your support means everything, and trust me, you're going to want to stick around for what's coming. This story? It's going to stay with you long after it's over. Now, let's talk about power. Real power. Not the kind you buy with money or inherit from your family. The kind that comes from somewhere deeper. Somewhere most people never have to access. Diane Porter was 38 years old when she took a job as a janitor. Simple work. Honest work. The kind of job where you show up, do what needs doing, and go home. She wore a bright yellow bandana that matched her work shirt. She pushed a cleaning cart through marble lobbies. She buffed floors and emptied trash cans and made sure everything sparkled for the executives who walked past her like she was invisible. Most people looked at her and saw exactly what they expected to see. A middle-aged woman in a custodial uniform. Someone to ignore. Someone who didn't matter in the grand scheme of corporate power. But see, here's what they didn't know. Here's what nobody bothered to find out. Diane Porter had spent 20 years in the United States Army. Special Forces. 3 tours in Afghanistan. 1 in Iraq. She'd earned a Purple Heart. A Bronze Star. Combat Action Badge. She'd commanded soldiers in life-or-death situations. She'd made decisions that saved lives and cost lives. She'd survived things that would break most people into pieces. And now she was trying to live quietly. Trying to blend in. Trying to convince herself that civilian life could be simple and peaceful. Except there was a problem. And his name was Harrison Steele. Harrison was 42. Sharp features. Navy Italian suits. The kind of expensive haircuts that cost more than most people's weekly groceries. He had pale blue eyes that looked at the world with absolute certainty that it owed him deference. His father had built the company from nothing, but Harrison treated it like his personal kingdom. He owned 17% of the shares. That gave him power. And he used that power like a weapon. For 2 years, Diane had endured his treatment. The condescending comments. The public humiliations. The way he'd step closer when he spoke to her, invading her space, reminding her that he could. Every day was a test of her restraint. Every encounter was a battle she fought by not fighting back. Because here's what Diane understood. In the military, you protect your unit. You defend the innocent. You stand your ground against bullies. But in civilian life, the rules were supposed to be different. You were supposed to keep your head down. Accept abuse. Smile and move on. Except Diane Porter had taken an oath once. An oath to defend against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And some oaths don't expire just because you change uniforms. One morning, everything shifted. Harrison approached her in the lobby. Other executives flanking him. Employees pretending to check their phones but actually listening to every word. He stepped close. So close she could smell his expensive cologne. And he told her to remember her place. Her place. Those 2 words carried the weight of every stereotype, every prejudice, every assumption people had made about her throughout her entire life. About her race. About her gender. About her value as a human being. And something inside Diane said, enough. She straightened to her full height, looked him directly in the eye, and told him that her place was wherever she did honest work to support herself. Same as anyone else. The lobby went silent. You could have heard a pin drop. Because nobody talked back to Harrison Steele. Nobody challenged his authority. Nobody made him look weak in front of his employees. His face flushed red. And in that moment, watching her refuse to be intimidated, watching other employees nod in agreement with her words, Harrison made a decision that would change everything. He walked away. But the look in his eyes? That was a promise. A threat. And Diane's military instincts recognized it immediately. She'd just made an enemy. A dangerous one. That night, Harrison stayed late at the office. His hands shook slightly as he dialed a number he'd memorized but hoped never to use. The man who answered had a voice like gravel in a cement mixer. His name was Tony, and he specialized in problems that needed solving quietly. Harrison explained his situation. An employee who didn't understand boundaries. Someone who needed to learn respect. The kind of lesson that left lasting impressions. They arranged to meet. Warehouse district. Cash payment. $5,000 for a message delivered with enough force that Diane would never forget it. As Harrison drove home that night, he tried to convince himself this was leadership. Maintaining order. Protecting the hierarchy that made civilization possible. But deep down, he knew the truth. This was about a man who couldn't tolerate the idea that someone he considered beneath him might actually be stronger than he was. Meanwhile, Diane was conducting her own preparations. 20 years of military service had taught her to trust her instincts. And every instinct was screaming that Harrison's retaliation was coming soon and coming hard. She began mapping the building's security systems, timing guard rotations, identifying potential choke points and escape routes, old habits from combat zones, things most janitors would never think about. But Diane wasn't most janitors. Jake Morrison noticed. He was the young security guard who actually treated Diane like a human being, who asked about her day and meant it. And Jake had been watching Harrison's behavior. The nervous energy. The suspicious phone calls. The way he'd suddenly requested that security cameras in the parking garage be disabled for maintenance. Jake found Diane in a storage room away from prying eyes and laid it out for her. Harrison was planning something. Probably an ambush. Probably involving professionals who wouldn't be traced back to him. Diane listened. Processed. Made her decision. She wasn't running. She'd never run from a bully in her life. She wasn't starting now. Jake stared at her. And for the first time, he really saw past the janitor's uniform to the soldier underneath. He asked her what she needed. She told him to be somewhere else that night. Somewhere far away with witnesses. Because what was coming? It was going to be violent. It was going to be permanent. And she wouldn't have an innocent man's blood on her hands. The night arrived. The building emptied. Security protocols shifted. And Diane Porter prepared for war. She changed into dark clothing that allowed for movement. Secured her service weapon. A Sig Sauer P320. The same model she'd carried through 3 deployments. She'd hoped never to need it again. Hope was a luxury she could no longer afford. Down in the parking garage, Tony and his crew were assembling. 7 men. All experienced in violence. All comfortable with the kind of work that left scars on victims' bodies and minds. They spread out. Checked their weapons. Prepared for what they thought would be a simple intimidation job. Then Diane appeared. Pushing her cleaning cart. Looking vulnerable and alone. Tony stepped into the light. Smiled. Asked if she was Diane Porter. She confirmed. He told her he had a message from a mutual friend. Something about forgetting her place. Diane set aside her cleaning supplies. Straightened. And, even surrounded by armed men, she radiated calm authority. Tony's smile faltered. Just slightly. Because something in her posture, something in her eyes, was wrong. This wasn't fear. This wasn't submission. This was readiness. And then everything went sideways for Harrison's hired killers. The parking garage lights blazed to full brightness. Emergency alarms wailed. Security doors slammed shut, trapping everyone inside. Tom from IT had rerouted the surveillance feeds. Patricia from HR had documentation ready. Angela from payroll had contacted news stations. Jake had positioned backup throughout the building. Diane's colleagues hadn't just offered moral support. They'd organized an actual operation. They'd chosen to stand with her. But Tony's crew was committed now. They moved to attack. And Diane Porter stopped being a janitor, pretending to be helpless. Staff Sergeant Porter took command. The first attacker lunged. Diane sidestepped. Drove her elbow into his solar plexus. Dropped him gasping. The second swung a tire iron. She ducked. Swept his legs. Sent him crashing into concrete. The others froze. Because this wasn't the victim they'd been promised. This was a trained warrior who turned their ambush into her battlefield. Tony drew his pistol, fired, and the parking garage erupted into war. For the next 10 minutes, Diane Porter demonstrated exactly what 20 years of military training meant. She used the environment as a weapon, ruptured the fire suppression system to create chaos, used chemical fog from fire extinguishers for concealment, climbed to elevated positions while her attackers searched at ground level. She moved like a ghost, appeared long enough to engage a target, vanished before they could respond. One by one, Tony's crew fell. Not because Diane was lucky, because she was better, faster, smarter, more experienced in the kind of violence that determines who lives and who dies. By the time police arrived, 7 attackers lay dead, and Diane Porter sat calmly among the emergency responders, covered in other people's blood but otherwise unharmed. Detective Williams surveyed the scene. 7 bodies, multiple weapons, one middle-aged woman in janitor's clothing who'd somehow survived impossible odds. He asked for her background. She told him. 20 years Army Special Forces. 3 combat deployments. The pieces clicked into place. Then Harrison arrived, pushing past police barricades, demanding to know what happened to his building. His timing was so perfect it raised immediate suspicion, and that's when Diane's colleagues presented their evidence. Security footage showing Harrison's meeting with Tony, documentation of years of harassment complaints, witness statements, digital records with timestamps that would stand up in court. Harrison's face went white. The parking garage, the hired killers, the attempted murder, all of it captured on camera, all of it traceable directly back to him. Detective Williams arrested him on the spot. Conspiracy to commit murder, attempted murder, harassment. The charges kept piling up. As Harrison was led away in handcuffs, his protests echoing through the garage, Diane finally let herself feel the exhaustion. 2 years of abuse, months of escalating threats, one night of violence that would haunt her dreams for years to come. But it was over. She'd survived. And more importantly, she'd proven something that needed proving. That standing up to bullies, even powerful ones, was possible. That justice, however messy, could prevail. 3 months later, the story had spread across the country. Diane opened her own security consulting firm. Her colleagues left the company to start a cooperative business. Harrison was serving 15 years in prison, his fortune decimated by legal fees and settlements. But more than that, workplace harassment complaints in the Atlanta area increased by 300%. Because people who'd been suffering in silence saw Diane's story and found their own courage. Companies started taking complaints seriously. Federal legislation was proposed to prevent serial harassers from simply moving between jobs. One woman's refusal to accept abuse had sparked a movement. A year after that night, Diane sat in her office reviewing contracts from Fortune 500 companies requesting training. Angela worked as her assistant. Jake ran his own security firm. Bobby started a worker-owned cooperative. Patricia opened an HR consulting practice. Tom's cybersecurity business was thriving. They'd all taken the courage they found that night and built something better. Diane still had nightmares sometimes. Still saw Dr. Rodriguez for PTSD counseling. Still carried the weight of 7 lives lost, even if those lives had belonged to men who came to hurt her. Healing wasn't linear. It wasn't simple. But it was possible. The Army reached out. They wanted her to help design training programs for veterans transitioning to civilian careers. Netflix wanted to do a documentary. The mayor wanted to give her another commendation. Diane accepted it all. Not because she wanted attention, but because she understood now that her story carried responsibilities beyond her personal comfort. Every person who reached out asking for help. Every woman trapped in a hostile workplace. Every man being harassed by someone with power. They all needed to know that fighting back was possible. One afternoon, Angela asked if Diane had any regrets. About defending herself. About the violence. About everything that happened. Diane considered the question carefully. 7 men were dead because one man's wounded pride had escalated beyond reason. A corporate parking garage had been turned into a battlefield because she'd refused to accept dehumanizing treatment. She regretted that it had been necessary. She'd never wanted that kind of confrontation. Never wanted to use her military skills against civilians. Never wanted to take lives again after leaving the service. But she didn't regret defending herself. She didn't regret standing up. She didn't regret showing other people that they didn't have to accept abuse quietly. Because here's the truth nobody talks about. Sometimes peace isn't possible. Sometimes the only way to stop a bully is to prove you won't be bullied. Sometimes justice requires people to stand up, even when it's terrifying. Even when it's dangerous. Even when the cost is enormous. Diane Porter had spent 2 years trying to avoid conflict. Trying to keep her head down. Trying to convince herself that swallowing her pride was the same as keeping the peace. But real peace doesn't come from submission. It comes from mutual respect. From systems that protect the vulnerable instead of the powerful. From courage that says, this far and no further. That night in the parking garage wasn't about one woman fighting 7 men. It was about what happens when ordinary people decide they deserve better. When they refuse to let fear dictate their choices. When they stand up for what's right even knowing the cost might be everything. The documentary crew asked Diane what message she wanted people to take from her story. She thought about it. Thought about all the soldiers she'd served with who'd chosen courage over safety. Thought about Angela's brother who died protecting others. Thought about every person who'd ever been told to know their place. And she said this. Your place is wherever you're doing honest work to support yourself. Your place is standing up for what's right. Your place is refusing to let bullies win. That's not about being violent. That's not about seeking conflict. That's about recognizing that some fights choose you whether you want them or not. And when they do, you face them with every ounce of strength you possess. Because strength isn't about being willing to fight. It's about being wise enough to know when fighting is the only option left. Diane Porter tried peace. She tried patience. She tried swallowing her pride and keeping her head down. For 2 years, she gave Harrison Steele every opportunity to see her as a human being deserving of basic respect. He chose violence instead. And when violence came, she met it with the skills and courage she'd earned through 20 years of service to her country. 7 men died that night. 7 families lost someone they loved. And Diane carries that weight every single day. She'll carry it for the rest of her life. But she also knows this. Because she stood up, other people found the courage to stand up. Because she refused to be broken, systems that protect harassers started changing. Because she survived, countless others found hope that they could survive too. That's the real story here. Not about parking garage firefights, or military training, or dramatic confrontations. It's about what happens when one person says enough. When they decide that dignity matters more than safety. When they choose courage over comfort. And here's what that taught everyone watching. You don't have to be a decorated combat veteran to stand up for yourself. You don't need military training to say no to abuse. You don't need special skills to demand basic human respect. What you need is the understanding that you matter. That your dignity has value. That bullies only win when good people choose silence over action. Diane Porter's story spread because it reminded people of something they'd forgotten. That ordinary individuals have extraordinary power when they decide to use it. That systems change when people refuse to accept them as they are. That justice, real justice, sometimes requires people to take stands that feel impossible. Today, Diane wakes up in her apartment surrounded by evidence of lives changed. Thank you letters from people who found courage through her example. Contracts from companies serious about creating safe workplaces. Photos of her team, the colleagues who stood with her when it mattered most. She still has nightmares. Still sees Dr. Rodriguez weekly. Still processes the trauma of that night and every night before it in war zones across the world. But she also has peace. Real peace. The kind that comes from knowing you stood for something that mattered. That you protected people who couldn't protect themselves. That you made the world slightly better by refusing to let evil win unopposed. That's the message. That's what I want you to understand. Not that violence is the answer. But that courage is necessary. That dignity matters. That standing up to bullies, even powerful ones, is possible when you remember your own worth. Harrison Steele thought Diane Porter was nobody. An invisible janitor who could be intimidated into submission. He thought money and power made him untouchable. He thought his place in the corporate hierarchy gave him the right to dehumanize anyone beneath him. He was catastrophically wrong. Because Diane Porter wasn't nobody. She was somebody who'd earned her place through blood and courage. Somebody who'd sworn an oath to defend the innocent. Somebody who understood that true strength comes from protecting others, not dominating them. And when he pushed her past the point of peaceful resistance, when he hired killers to break her spirit, he discovered something that changed everything. Some people can't be broken. Some spirits can't be crushed. Some warriors never stop being warriors, even when they're wearing janitor uniforms and pushing cleaning carts through corporate lobbies. The parking garage that night became the place where Harrison Steele's assumptions died, where 7 hired killers learned the cost of choosing violence, where Diane Porter proved that courage isn't about never being afraid. It's about facing fear and acting anyway. In the years since, the ripples from that night have spread further than anyone imagined. New laws protecting workplace harassment victims. Companies implementing real accountability. Countless individuals finding the strength to speak up about their own experiences. All because one woman said no. One woman refused to accept abuse. One woman stood her ground when everything inside her was screaming to run. That's the power we all have. Maybe not the military training or combat experience, but the power to decide who we want to be. The power to set boundaries and defend them. The power to say that our dignity matters more than our comfort. Diane Porter's story isn't finished. Every day brings new challenges. New people seeking help. New opportunities to turn courage into collective change. She's building something that will outlast her. Something that honors every person who ever suffered in silence and every soldier who died defending principles that matter. And she does it knowing that the cost was real. That 7 families lost loved ones. That trauma doesn't heal just because justice was served. That some wounds stay open forever. But she also knows this. That fighting back was necessary. That standing up mattered. That refusing to be victimized sparked changes that will protect countless others. Sometimes the hardest battles are the ones we never wanted to fight. Sometimes courage means facing consequences we never anticipated. Sometimes justice requires sacrifices that break our hearts even as they prove our strength. Diane Porter understands all of this. She lives with it every day. And she keeps moving forward because that's what warriors do. They face what comes. They protect the vulnerable. They stand for what's right even when it costs everything. That's the story I wanted to share with you today. Not just about one woman's fight against one bad man, but about what's possible when ordinary people decide they deserve better. When they find allies in unexpected places. When they discover that they don't have to face their battles alone. Because here's the truth that matters most. Diane wasn't alone that night. Jake was coordinating backup. Angela was documenting everything. Patricia was preparing evidence. Tom was rerouting security feeds. Bobby and Carol were positioned throughout the building. A network of ordinary people who decided that one woman's dignity was worth risking their own safety. That's the real power. Not individual heroism, but collective courage. Not one person standing alone, but communities deciding together that bullies don't get to win. So as we close this story, as we reflect on everything that happened in that parking garage and in the months that followed, remember this. You have more power than you realize. You have more courage than you know. And you have more allies than you can see. When the time comes to stand up for yourself or someone else, when you're facing a bully who seems untouchable, when everything inside you is screaming to run, remember Diane Porter. Remember that she was just an ordinary person who did extraordinary things because circumstances demanded it. You can do the same. Maybe not with military training or combat experience, but with moral courage, with refusal to accept injustice, with the understanding that your dignity matters and some fights are worth everything. That's the lesson. That's the gift of this story. Not that violence solves problems, but that courage changes worlds. That standing up inspires others. That refusing to be broken creates ripples that spread further than you'll ever know. Diane Porter tried to live quietly, tried to avoid conflict, tried to convince herself that peace meant accepting abuse. And then she learned what so many others have learned throughout history, that some fights choose you, that some stands must be taken, that sometimes the only path to real peace runs straight through courage. She took that path. And on the other side, She found not just survival, but purpose. Not just victory, but meaning. Not just justice for herself, but change for countless others. That's what happens when one person refuses to surrender their dignity. When they stand up knowing the cost might be everything. When they prove through action that courage isn't the absence of fear, but the triumph over it. Thank you for staying with this story until the very end. If it touched something in you, if it sparked recognition or hope or determination, then it served its purpose. Because stories like this aren't just entertainment. They're reminders of what we're capable of when we remember our own strength. Now, before you go, I need you to do something. Hit that like button if this story moved you. Subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. Drop a comment telling me what you're taking away from Diane's journey. Your engagement helps these stories reach more people. And trust me, the next one is even more powerful. You won't want to miss it. So stay tuned. Stay courageous. And remember that every single one of you has a warrior inside waiting for the moment when courage matters most.